Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 21st of January, 2018. We're talking about three topics. Number one, false economies. Number two, professional gear. And number three, consumer gear. So let me just start with talking about false economies. The concept of false economy is something I first heard from Mark Edward Lewis. He is primarily a sound post guy. He taught the Sound Advice tour that was a series of workshops that were done, I think, about 2 or 3 years ago. And he's a very good teacher. But one of the things he talked about a whole lot was the concept of a false economy, and that is most often embodied by the statement, "We'll fix it in post." And we all know that that's a problem at some level. So there's always a sacrifice of some sort when you say, "We'll fix it in post." Because first of all, that implies that there's something wrong or something that's not perfect or something that's not up to the standards that we're trying to accomplish for that particular piece. So the problem is that comes in a couple of different forms. The inevitable cost is either lower quality than we had originally planned, something that's so difficult to fix in post that, or so expensive to fix in post that we abandon the project. So that's a sad ending. The video or short film or whatever it is you're working on doesn't eventually get published or broadcast. Or it's just really expensive. It increases the cost of the overall project. And this can come in a variety of forms. For example, you could decide that, you know what, we're just going to shoot with natural light. Cloud goes in front of the sun in the middle of a scene, or the best scene has a sun behind a cloud, and so you have to do some additional color grading in post. That will, first of all, cost you in either time. If it's a passion project, it will cost you in time, at the least. It could cost you in additional software potentially, but most likely in time. The results may not be as good as you originally had hoped, because again, now you're working with underexposed footage potentially. Or the look isn't exactly what you wanted, but there's always a cost of some sort. Likewise with audio. There was also this experience I had once where for a particular short film I was working on, the director had written a scene, well, actually the writer, I think a director were separate people in this case, but the writer had included a scene in a public restroom, 3 guys talking to each other. Where we ended up shooting it was an incredibly reverberant room. Not surprising, it's almost entirely tile. And I warned the director, I said, this is a problem here. This is so, I mean, it's reverberant just when you're listening to it, but on the recording, you're going to be surprised at how reverberant it is and how echoey it is. And definitely you want to probably have some of that vibe, but you also probably don't want so much of that vibe that is difficult to hear the actors. So they were accommodating, and what we ended up doing is we had some production assistants that were able to hold up a sound blanket, and we were able to make the sound a lot better. So we could have just ignored that. We could have just said, you know what, let's just go ahead and shoot it and we'll fix it in post. What would that have entailed? Well, somebody would have had to have Isotope RX or some other software for reducing reverberation. And the problem with that software is that while it does a decent job of reducing the reverb to some extent, it's not perfect. And if you push it too hard, you get all sorts of artifacts and the dialogue doesn't sound great. If you don't push it enough, then you can't remove necessarily as much as you want. So it was less expensive and less effort to spend the 2 minutes it took, actually, I think I had to run back out to the car and get a sound blanket, bring it back in, and have some people hold it up. And so it probably took another 5 minutes during production, but the director decided, thankfully, from my point of view, that that was worth the time spent then to avoid the additional issues in post. So that's a great example of the types of things I'm talking about here. Now, so that's a false economy. A false economy is we'll just fix it in post because you end up spending more money. That's the idea. Let's talk now about consumer gear versus professional gear. I have, on my main channel on YouTube, I've talked a lot about various types of gear, done a lot of reviews. More recently, we've been doing more reviews of professional grade gear. And the comments I'm getting from people are pretty interesting. One thing that I'm hearing a lot are things like, for example, just yesterday, I posted a video which was a review of the Lectrosonics portable digital audio recorder. It's a little tiny body pack type recorder. So in lieu of sending the signal wirelessly, it just records it right on that little device, and then you sync it up in post. It costs $750. And some of the comments were, what a waste of money, or why is that so darn expensive? I can just use my Zoom H1 and a lavalier microphone and get the same result, so on and so forth. So what I would say about that is I think, number one, let me just say this. Consumer grade gear can be perfectly legitimate and adequate for the project you're doing. I think a lot of people assume that the difference between consumer grade gear and professional grade gear when it comes to audio gear is that the professional grade gear, A, is built a lot stronger, and B, sounds a lot better. And in a lot of cases, that's true, but that's not all there is to it. Sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not true. Sometimes you can get, the consumer grade audio gear has gotten a lot better in the last few years. And if you know how to use it right, you can get some very good results with it. But let me give you one example. When I was first starting out as creating video and film, I used to shoot weddings as a photographer. And I had a client that called me 2 weeks before the wedding and said, we've had an emergency. Our videographer is canceled or is not going to be able to shoot. Can you also shoot some video? And so we worked out how we were going to do that. And I agreed to do it and set their expectations that, look, I'm photographing as well. I've got one assistant. I can set up a camera and, we can get some shots during the reception and things of that nature. But this is not going to be like a really high-end video. I just don't, it's only 2 of us and this is what you're paying. So this is what we can do for that price. And I ended up using a Zoom H1 and a lavalier microphone on the groom during the actual ceremony itself. And that worked okay. Fortunately, everything was fine. What is not unusual in those circumstances, however, is that the groom could have moved in such a way. First of all, I didn't have even an option of hiding it on the bride. There was just no way that was going to happen because the Zoom H1 is actually kind of biggish and when it comes to hiding it on a person. And, fortunately with the groom, they're wearing a jacket, not a big deal to hide it on them. But on a bride, it wasn't even an option. So we mic'd the groom and went with it. But what could happen in those circumstances on the Zoom H1, there is not a locking connector. So if the groom moved in a certain way, the microphone could have easily popped out. And then I would have been left with whatever the inbuilt stereo microphones inside his jacket would have recorded, which would have been, in my guessing, probably a lot of clothing rustle is what I would have captured. So that is just an example of the type of thing where, can you use a Zoom H1 and a lavalier microphone to get great audio? The answer is yes, you can. The consideration, however, is if you're a professional making money with this gear, doing jobs where you have clients who care about the results, particularly in cases where you don't have a lot of time to do retakes or you don't even have an option to do retakes, then it becomes a false economy. And that's where spending the extra money on something like the Lectrosonics for $750 with a locking plug would make more sense. Now, some people, I can hear them already, people are going to say, what about the Tascam DR-10? You can do the same thing with that, and it has a locking plug. Yeah, sure, you could. If you're a professional using your gear several times a week, and you expect your investment to pay off over time, and the gear gets bounced around a lot, it gets bumped and it gets bruised and stuff happens. And I can tell you with wireless gear that you put on actors, that stuff gets bumped around. I've had people drop stuff. It just happens. It's just the reality of the situation. So that's where Lectrosonics for $750 may make more sense than a $200 Tascam DR-10L, which has a plastic build. So those are some things as well. Now, in addition to that, what's different about the Lectrosonics, as an example, is that the Lectrosonics A is built much better physically. It's a piece of machined and milled aluminum that's then anodized. And then it's, in addition to that, it has a special 5-pin miniature XLR, TA5 type of connector on it. And the reason they put that in there was that because of that type of connector and the required plug that you use on your microphone, you can actually put some I believe this is how it works. You can put some electronics in the connector that optimize the power that's supplied to the microphones for that particular microphone. So you can't necessarily do that with plug-in power. It's more of a hit and miss thing. You'll get power to your microphone. And I should say plug-in power is usually what you have on a 3.5 millimeter plug for a lavalier input. So, or a 3.5 millimeter input, which is typically used with lavalier microphones. But in any case, the Lectrosonics has this. It optimizes the voltage that's supplied to the microphone for that particular microphone. And as a result, you get the optimal performance out of that particular microphone. So there are a variety of advantages. Are any one of them on their own going to be a massive advantage for someone who's just working on a passion project and is not getting paid? Not necessarily. That's where I say, yeah, a Zoom H1 and a lavalier microphone that sounds good could be a completely and perfectly adequate solution for that situation. However, it doesn't mean that the Pro Gear is bad and that the people that buy Pro Gear are idiots and doesn't make any sense why anything would cost that much. Another big piece of a big difference between those two, Zoom is at least traditionally a consumer electronics company. Sorry, not Zaxcom, but Lectrosonics is a company that caters to professionals. The difference you see there then is in their repair and service programs. So if something goes bad on a Zoom product, I don't know how the service and support works for that. Probably in most circumstances, what they're going to do, if something is defective that you didn't cause it, it's within the warranty period, they'll probably exchange it and give you a new one. But if it's outside the warranty period, pretty sure your option is to buy a new one. In the case of the Lectrosonics, however, they actually service their gear. You can actually send it to them, they will fix it and send it back. Now, is the warranty a ton better? I think it's a 1-year warranty probably on both of those, both Zoom and Lectrosonics. But you can get your Lectrosonics serviced and fixed and back out to you. So that's another difference that I think is very important to professionals as well. So I just wanted to highlight this here just to, when I do a review of a professional piece of gear, I'm not trying to convince you should buy it. I'm just trying to educate you on what the differences are so that when you find yourselves in one or the other situation, passion project, professional job, that you have a variety of choices. Now, does that mean you can't use consumer gear for professional jobs? You certainly can. However, you're putting some things at risk. You're putting yourself at risk and your clients at risk. And it's just something you have to think through, and you have to be open and I think honest with yourself and honest with your clients about that. So for example, if you're shooting some corporate job and they have a budget of $300 to pay you, you can say, I'd be happy to do it. I just need you to know there's going to be some, I guess it's just I don't know if you have to say this, but this needs to figure into the overall pricing, that if the expectation is that you're only going to get 5 minutes with an executive, you have to make it work. Those are cases where you can say, okay, we can do that. Here's the gear I have on hand. There are some risks. Something could go wrong. Or if you'd like to rent such and such gear, that will eliminate that risk, and we can do that as an option as well. So these are just the kind of things you need to think about if you're going to start moving into the professional services on the audio side and video production side. Some things to think about. And that's, I think, really an important thing to understand when it comes to the difference between consumer grade gear and professional grade gear. So all that, I just wanted to it's not exciting types of things to talk about because it's not something that makes your audio better in and of itself, but I think it's worthwhile to think about these things, especially if you're getting to a point where you're starting to do professional or paid types of jobs with your audio production and post-production. So hope that was helpful. If you have any questions or thoughts, go ahead and leave those down in the comments below. And I hope you get out there and make some great sound. We'll talk to you again next week.